Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is James Laurain. James describes himself as a recovering engineer, clean for about 6 years now. Sometimes he relapses and fixes a microwave, but he has a strong group of friends who support him and keep him accountable. When he's not fighting his engineering cravings, he's a technical copywriter who translates geekspeak into a language regular human beings can understand. But hiding behind this geek facade, James is actually one of the greatest sales minds of social media. And he clearly got to me, because I spent weeks tracking him down for this episode, genuinely buying his heartfelt apologies, only to find out it was all a cunning ploy to see if I was really committed to having him on the show. The man is an evil genius. Ladies and gentlemen, James Laurain. James, welcome to the show.
Oh my goodness, thank you. You know, I listened to all your intros from your other podcasts, and you're like, this person is like a Nobel Prize winner. This person is like, you know, keynote speaker wanted by everybody. This person invented the internet. And then I thought, what are you going to have for me? Like, I'm impressed at your level of research, sir. That was amazing.
Well, let me give you one more bit of research that hopefully will impress you and amuse you.
Oh.
Let's see who I've got here with me.
Is that a little Wolverine?
It is indeed. It's a Logan to be exact. Exact from the movie, and the reason I have it here, apart from the fact that I know you are a Wolverine fan or used to be, is because I record this podcast in the Fortress of Pillows, which is my daughter's bedroom, and when the oldest Alice started sort of regressing in her sleep and feeling afraid of things in the dark, one of the only things I could do to not trick her, but convince her that it was okay to sleep by herself was to tell her that Logan was going to protect her.
That is awesome. How do you know I'm a Wolverine fan?
Listen, I do my research, man.
Oh my gosh. I think, you know what, honestly though, everyone's a Wolverine fan. So let's be real about this. It's probably a safe bet.
They should be Wolverine fans.
They should be Wolverine fans. That's a good idea though. I got to get one of those for my kids' rooms.
Oh, they're great. They're great.
Smart man.
So there is the misdirection wasn't just you playing really hard to come to the episode. I might have suffered from a tiny bit of misdirection as well, because when I originally came across you on social media, two things drew me to you. The first thing is that I misread your headline. I misread it as "I can explain high tech to your mom," and instead of to my mom. And I thought, wow, that takes balls.
Yeah, I can see that. Now I'm a little nervous. Maybe I should capitalize that.
I think I can explain high tech to your mom. It just changes completely the persona you have.
Yeah. Uh-oh. I'm gonna have to look at that now. Yeah, it's funny. Some people were offended by that.
Really?
But yeah, a couple of people said it was ageist and sexist, and I'm like, you don't know my mom. So if I would have said your mom, then it probably would have been. But I was talking about my mom. It's legitimate.
Yeah, it's difficult nowadays, because even when you're talking about a real person, it's very hard to figure out even if it's 100% the case with that one person, you might still be giving the impression that you're being prejudiced. But I don't know, it's a minefield out there for these things.
It is really difficult. Yeah.
And so that was the first thing that drew my eye to your content on social media. But the other thing was, it was a story, and if I recall correctly, it was a story about sourdough, which I understand is also one of your obsessions, right?
Yeah. We'll go with that. Yeah. When the pandemic hit, I realized the only thing we went to the store for was like bread. So I should preface, I live in the middle of nowhere, which you probably know, but a lot of people don't. I'm surrounded by cows. There's not a lot out here. So I found a farmer down the road where I can go get milk. And it's actually illegal to buy milk right from the cow in Michigan. You can't buy milk from a cow. You have to buy the milk from the store. You can't buy it from the cow. Or they have to stamp it like not for human consumption. or you do a herd share, which means I pay for a portion of the upkeep of a cow, and then you get the milk as the byproduct of paying for the cow, and that's legal. So I get my milk, my eggs, my meat from a farmer. So all I need really is toilet paper. I told my wife, let's plant a toilet tree, or bread. So I got a sourdough starter from somebody, and 6 months later, I think I've hit a good point of making artisan sourdough. But yeah, it's one of those things. I think everyone needs to have one of those things where they can just turn their brain off and just, do something with your hands, make something. For me, it's sourdough. Have you tried it? Have you baked?
No, not really. So baking is not really my thing. But the main reason why I don't bake is because I find it remarkably dangerous. So I'm not one of those people that can basically eat whatever they want and never pay the price. And one of my Achilles heels is warm bread with butter. Like I could just eat that for the rest of my life. And that and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I avoid having it in the house. And if I learn how to bake, then I would force myself to bake all the time. I'm more of a barbecue type of guy.
Okay. Oh, I like barbecue. It's about that season here. I learned when I make bread now, I have to make multiple loaves at once. Because when you first pull it out of the oven, my wife and my kids will pounce on it and eat an entire loaf. So for that reason, exactly as you said, I need to make 3 or 4 at a time because one's going to be gone in 5 minutes. It's sad.
My ex-wife believed that if you're going to bake a cake, you might as well bake 3 cakes because the first one everybody pounces on straight away. Yeah. And then the second one you actually get to enjoy. And then if you're going to bake 2, you bake a third one and, take it to work or whatever. But,
oh my goodness.
I put on a lot of weight during that relationship.
It's dangerous. That's dangerous. Oh my goodness. 3 cakes, whole cakes?
Yep.
Not cupcakes, a full cake.
No, cakes, pies, whatever. I would arrive home and just see on the windowsill 2 or 3 cakes. And I was like, oh, 2, she's restrained herself today. And it's no, the third one is still in the oven.
That's awesome. That's smart, I'll say.
So I saw that sourdough story, and the reason I said that was a bit of misdirection was because I saw that and I thought, okay, this guy can definitely tell a story, and then I put you on my ever growing list of people that I want to talk to about storytelling. But if there is a genuine skill, I haven't seen a great deal more of it because most of the other stuff you do is not really what most people would consider storytelling. But having said that, and again, you feel free to disagree with me. Do you disagree with me?
No, I was going to say you should have seen. So it's funny. If you want to talk imposter syndrome, I think nobody has it bigger than me, which is funny because that's imposter syndrome, right? I did one a while ago. I did a series. It might have been before the sourdough, or it might have been before you were watching, where I was having people recommend random items, or I was picking random dumb items, and I would turn them into a story. So somebody pointed out to me, and I don't know if it was you or somebody else, that there was a group of people who bought things from a thrift store and then listed them on Craigslist and wrote a story behind it. That was you. Yeah, okay, so I took it. That's awesome that was you, by the way. That was a long time ago.
Well, yeah. What was the name of the? I forget now. It's the relevant. There's not a relevant objects, but it's something objects. Significant objects. That's
how cool if that was you.
Experiment. Wow.
Yeah, so I started. So I wrote one on an old school egg beater, and I wrote some posts about that. The best one I had, I don't know if you read one. It was about chairs.
I read the egg beater one. The egg beater one I read.
Did you read the chairs one? You'd have to look back.
I don't think I have.
Well, it was basically what's the point of a chair? If I'm gonna take something boring like a chair, and I sat there and I thought about it on a chair, ironically, and the chair, it's not a chair. It's not something you sit on. A chair is a feeling of belonging. Really, if you show up at a table and there's no chair for you, you don't belong. You know what I mean? You feel like you don't belong. Now you're awkward. If there's a chair for you, you feel like you belong. So I rewrote a whole thing about, I'd have to go find it. But it was about essentially that, selling a chair is you're not buying a chair. You're buying this belonging. You're buying the ability for other people to belong and all that stuff. And I kind of wrapped that one in a story, and that one did incredibly well. So I don't think, do I have a skill at it? I frankly don't think I have a skill at much. It's just people tend to like what I do, which is cool. So I don't know. The problem I have.
So let me pick up on the chair one.
Yeah.
I think I love that. Although it must be said that I had a chair in school, and I'm not sure I belonged there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So I think you can have a chair and not belong, but not having a chair is a very clear sign that you don't belong. And I think that, but what I really liked about what you said there is that you were looking for the feeling. So yes, sure, it does a physical thing, or allows you to do a physical thing, but what's the feeling that's engendered by it? And this is the one thing I hammer home over and over and over again when I talk to people about this whole nonsense of people not having stories, or thinking that their stories are boring or they're not fantastic enough. And I would say that the story is not about the external circumstances of the story. The story is about the feelings generated by the story. Mm-hmm. So you can have a story about feeling inadequate or belonging or overcoming obstacles. And those obstacles don't need to be Everest, to take the obvious example. It could be a challenge as a parent, or in your job, or just, you were trying to catch the bus and you were not, whatever. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are, is how did it make you feel? Because that's what people will identify with. That's not the only thing they identify with, but if you get that right, then, you're on to something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing I had told people is, for the lurkers and the people who don't post frequently and who don't write things very much, I said the challenge is write something that you think everybody else knows. Because what happens is usually somebody writes something that they assume everybody else knows, like, okay, this is dumb knowledge, and they just post something about it. And then a lot of people write back and say thank you and interact, and even people who do know wow, it's a great way of putting it. I didn't think of it that way. And it's like all these people get amazing feedback. And I know a few people I started that with who are now like regularly contributing, because I think it lowers that barrier wall to just say, write something stupid everybody knows about. And half the time they put something at the beginning that says, everybody knows this, but, and then they go on to say something that like I had no idea about. So I think that's a great way to get that wall down.
It's a very good tip, tell people about something you think they know, instead of trying to educate them or inform them about stuff that they don't know. At least what you are going to get, if you pick your subjects well, is relevance. It will matter to people because it's a subject they care about. And something else that you said, so we started talking about half of your tagline on LinkedIn, which is I can explain high tech to my mom. But the second part of it is tech copywriter for humans. So I just want, I think I know your answer, but I wanted to have you explain anyway what qualifies the for human part.
Yes. So I wanted to differentiate there from technical writers in general. So I've told this a few times and you've probably heard it, but I have an electrical engineering degree, and I have that degree because my mom said that's the degree I should get. So she said, you're good at math and science, be an engineer. And I feel like a lot of people who go to college don't understand what they want to do until they're already there, right? So that's what happened. And I went and I did that engineering for 10 years, and I realized that I don't actually love it as much as I thought I did. And I really like the understanding consumer psychology and why people buy things. So if you have a new product, and a lot of times I work with, a lot of the copywriting is actually like website stuff that's not technical at all that people ping me for. But a lot of the products I work with are like microcontrollers and like, semi-complex stuff, microprocessors, FPGAs, all this crazy stuff. And there are a lot of technical writers who will take that and translate it into here's your memory size and this and this and this, but it's not, number one, I don't want to do that because I don't, it's good. People, when they get to that level, they need that level of information. If I bought the part and I'm going to use it and I'm very closely evaluating for, okay, that's great. But I wanted to add the for humans part because I don't enjoy that as much as I enjoy understanding the complex system and then breaking it down so the average person can understand it. So that was my own stab at trying to separate myself from people who basically just list specifications and write traditional data sheets that are incredibly dry and only really for people who need specific answers when they are in the specific moment.
Yeah, there is a problem that you've touched on before, but also now, whereas if you're talking to people from a position of superior knowledge, in the sense of you have more knowledge than them, you are suffering, and you think people are going to get it. You are suffering from what a friend of mine calls your cock problem, also known as the curse of knowledge problem. Yep. And is this assumption that people get what you're trying to say? They understand. Oh yes, but I'm talking about recruitment, and everybody that will know that a lot of people don't get what you're trying to say, and I think it's interesting because when I try to tell people about storytelling and what's the point of storytelling other than being entertaining, I have often used the metaphor of a language that human beings actually understand. Mm-hmm. So when you speak in figures and just statements and opinions and data, your brain has not evolved to understand that. I mean, you understand cognitively, but it's not how the brain assembles information and retrieves information. So you're forcing, it's like my Spanish is decent enough. My Catalan is almost non-existent. So if I'm trying to speak to someone in Catalan and understand what they're saying in Catalan, my brain is doing a whole lot of work and is almost certainly not catching anywhere near as much of the information being imparted or the meaning. Mm-hmm. But if they speak in English to me, or in Portuguese, which is my native language, then that's fine. I'll get it, no problem. I'll understand 100%. And I think there's that happens with storytelling, but also happens with the type of copywriting you do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. No, and I like what you put exactly with retrieving and recalling information and where we put things. I think people have asked, how do I write like you do? That's a tough one. Have you heard the story of Picasso with the napkin drawing in the cafe? Most people have heard that.
I posted that last week.
Oh, there you go.
But
good.
Yeah,
I was going to post it this week. Now I won't.
Well, I'm sure my take on it, I'm sure it will be completely different than yours, and yours will get a much bigger audience. So post away. But do you want to tell the story, or should I?
Yeah. Well, so from my perspective, it was a lady came and asked Picasso can I have a drawing or a quick, whatever. She saw him at a cafe and wanted a drawing. He made up a drawing and he gave it to her and said it'll be $40,000 or whatever the dollar amount was. And she said, $40,000, it took you 5 minutes. He said, well, this drawing didn't take me 5 minutes. It took me 40 years. It's the culmination of all the knowledge up to this point. I think the hardest part, what works best in technical writing, is analogy. I've heard a lot of people talk flack about analogy lately because analogies, you can miss things. They're not entirely accurate. They may be misinterpreted or misunderstood, and those are all very valid risks. But if I'm trying to explain to somebody who's entirely non-technical, so like realtors, financial advisors, like a lot of people who follow me, and I'm trying to explain to them an inductor, which is like just a coil of wire wrapped around a ferrite. Like I could say it like that, and that doesn't mean anything. Probably most people think I said ferret. But if I explain it and I relate it to like a gooseneck faucet, so a faucet that looks like this. So when you turn the water on, it takes a while for the water to turn on. When you turn the water off, it flows for a little bit longer because of that gooseneck. Like now people can understand the basic concept. The same thing works with electricity. When you power an inductor, it takes a while, and when it finally comes out, when you turn it off, a little bit of extra electricity comes out. Is the analogy perfect? No. But that is kind of how, when I'm dealing with things that are higher tech, I did chaos theory, I did string theory, I did parts of relativity and some of what Einstein's work, and that's been later kind of developed on. If you don't have analogy, if I can't turn that somehow into, it is a mini story, right? I'm trying to relate it to something that you can see. Maybe you've experienced a kitchen faucet like that. If I don't do that and I just stick to data, I will be more accurate, and I will lose like 9 out of 10 people.
Yeah, so it's worth, I think, being a little clearer for anyone who's never seen your content, what exactly is that you do. But most of the posts that I've seen you do recently, after you did those series on stories, is you're either getting something sort of technical or a complex subject like you just described, and picking an analogy to explain it to lay people. But you also you rewrite copy, advertising copy that, or ads, as most people understand them, that other people have done to make them better. And one question I have when we were explaining the gooseneck analogy is a lot of these things you're explaining are very technical, right? So I obviously understand that there is an element of showing your talent and showing what you're capable of when you're tackling those subjects, but is there a technical person out there that you're going to sell one of these very complicated contraptions to that actually needs the tech copywriter for human? Because I would see it like I'm never gonna buy a lot of the things that I've seen you describe in that way. So is it just the exercise of the skill and to show people that it can be made simpler, or is there actual market for technical people that want a good copy?
This is such a deep subject I've been talking to people about. Here's what I'll say. So the sales funnel, there is the sales funnel, right? And so in the sales funnel, in the top, we have people who don't even know about you, really. And then they kind of enter the funnel, and then it's mild awareness down to, like, I'm ready to go, ready to buy at the bottom of the funnel. A lot of my problem with a lot of the advertisements, with a lot of technical writing, with a lot of things like that, I am at the smack dab bottom of the funnel, like the very bottom, because I am advertising. I just saw one that I'm going to rewrite very soon, actually, that has so many acronyms and so many complex. It talks about their proprietary system and all that. Nobody knows what that is. Like, nobody. So the amount of people who are in that bottom of the funnel is very, very small. So why am I curating advertising content for those tiny people as my only source? Now, mind you should have some for them, obviously. My thought is, though, that the funnel itself, to hit the max amount of people, if you're going to put an ad on LinkedIn, you may as well hit a lot of people, right? We need to increase awareness, and that's where I see a big gap. So a lot of higher tech things, they don't get anybody in that awareness stage. So I'm trying to think of specifically what it was. There's a lot of electronic sites who are advertising electronics. They don't start with the basics. They start posting the really complex things. Here's the difference between, LoRa, which is this long-range wireless protocol, and Sigfox, which is this competing long-range protocol. And again, you hit people in the bottom of that funnel, like the very bottom. Let's say you were Khan Academy. Khan Academy started by, someone explaining the very, very basic rudimentary things. If you start explaining the basics, like what is a diode, what is a capacitor? For electronics, these are the basics. These are the tiny little components that make up nothing. You can suck people in that awareness phase. And similarly, you get like the students in school who are trying to learn, and they want to look up what this is because they have it for an assignment, so they go look it up. But you're casting that super wide net that guides people to the funnel of things at the bottom that kind of already exist. All those really high complex things already exist. So really, a lot of what I do, I get a lot of good feedback from the people who are complex, like who are in that bottom of the funnel, because they're like, oh, that's a great way to relate it. People like me who were bottom of the funnel want ways to talk to our wives, spouses, children about what we do so that they understand it. Because again, to your point, humans want to talk to other humans and tell them what we do and have people understand us. So I think people appreciate that. But to me, a lot of what I do is push the ads kind of up the funnel to catch a wider audience and have them understand, look, this is accessible to you. You can understand this. You can do it. And then maybe you might end up being bold enough to tackle, some of these challenges or some of these products or things like that. So I was going to actually do a series too on like repairing electronics because it's easier than people think. But this way your little, like my $15 milk frother in the kitchen, like when it breaks, it doesn't mean you have to throw it out. Like here's the things to look for to fix it. So for me, it's about educating the greater people having them understand, making it accessible to them, not necessarily pleasing those people at the bottom of the funnel because there's already so much information for them there.
So you talked about you talked about analogies before, and I think a very similar type of device would be metaphors. And I've seen many people describe a metaphor as the shorter, the smallest version of a story. So I referred earlier to my Achilles heel. Now, most people these days probably don't know where that expression comes from, but they might have some awareness of what it means. But obviously, this was a much longer story from Greek mythology of this guy Achilles, who was the greatest warrior of all time, and he was invulnerable, I believe. And the only way to kill him was hitting him in the heel. And that's become Achilles' heel, and now everybody understands that that's your weakness or your weakest point. And that is the easiest way to access a whole bunch of meaning in people's minds without having to say something that takes 3 or 4 sentences to say. So the analogy and the metaphor are perhaps the shortcut to what a lot of people do with stories. The story is obviously a longer version of that, but your goal, I think, is you've now created an analogy in a way that people can understand without it being so quick. But obviously, I think if you're doing copy, you perhaps just don't have the space to write a story for the stuff people are going to hire you for. You can't tell a story in most cases, but having done that before, and if we're just talking about content and getting ideas across to people, do you have any particular preference for when do you think a story like the ones you've done before are more suitable, and when the type of analogy where you pick a movie or you pick an everyday object and you use that as the comparison? Do you have any clear thoughts on why one over the other?
I guess for me it'd be emotional appeal is when I would switch to a story. So it is kind of interesting. I just did a copywriting competition. Did you see that?
Congratulations.
So, yeah, well, thank you. So we had to write, we crowdsourced. Someone would pick a topic. We gave it to everybody, whatever topic they wanted, and then me and another copywriter would give it a go and try to create something compelling. Again, we limited to 1,300 characters. It's the size of a LinkedIn post because we were originally just going to post ours, but we put it in an article so it'd be anonymous, which was actually a lot more fun. But it was about neurodiversity in the workplace. So people with ADHD, autism, all that, and getting a job, encouraging people to hire those individuals. That one actually would have been like really good for a story, I thought. Because it's an emotional appeal. There's logic in it. There's a logical appeal, obviously. A lot of these people are very talented and have very good skills, and they're just not well suited for the actual hiring process. But I battled with that. The blank page is copywriter's worst enemy. Because do you pick an individual and guide that person through? So here's Johnny, and Johnny is an all-star and does all these things, but Johnny gets rejected on each interview. And why? Well, because Johnny can't sit still. And what's it matter if he can sit still or not? Because he's incredible. Or do you kind of go facts and data? Which way do you drive? So if it was neurodiversity encompasses a whole lot of things, so I wanted to encompass all of them. I didn't want to focus on autism and leave out ADHD. I didn't want to leave out some of the other ones. I wanted to capture as much and as different as I could. So my approach was not a story in that regard. But when I would switch to a story is, again, when I'm trying to elicit an emotional appeal. That's not a complete black and white, because I could do a story for some of these electronics. I just don't have a lot of room. I have 1,300 characters to do it. And I think a metaphor does fine. But that to me is when, if I'm really looking to get someone passionate or an emotion, then stories are where I go.
Yeah, I think that the reason you won that one was because So I'm going to disagree with you. I think what you did was significantly closer to a story in that particular case than what the other copywriter did. Because what you did was you gave us a whole bunch of characters that we would recognize. So I think you talked about Steve Jobs and Einstein and a whole bunch of other people that are normally considered to be very smart or geniuses even. And then you said, what they all have in common is that none of them would be hired by most companies with their hiring practices because they are neurodiverse, and they would fall through the cracks because of things that clearly shouldn't matter. Whereas the other copywriter, what she did was she gave us a couple of 2 or 3 lines, and then at some point right after she said, "Did you pick up the double word in the first line?" There was a the in the first line, and it says, a neurodiverse person would have caught it, so hire people that think differently than you. And I thought that was very, very smart, but I didn't think it necessarily moved the emotion needle anywhere near as much as yours, because yours had more clearer characters that we could imagine as real people. And so there's this thing I've said a number of times, which is emotion decides and reason justifies. And if you don't have the emotional trigger when you're making the decision, the fact that it's smart won't ever weigh as heavily or as powerfully as the fact that it moved you in any way. And you can feel for the people that have lost a job, whereas the other one is more, you were being silly by not hiring the person that thinks differently than you. Whereas the first one is about putting yourself into these people's lives, and because they are different. So in my reading, that's why that one ended up being preferred. And slim margins, but I still think that when you have, it doesn't need to be a story, but you have story elements in there. So there's a context, there's characters.
Yeah, the thing I like is you always get into the short copy, long copy. So what works better? It's always a question. Does short copy or long copy work better? And the answer I like to give is it has to be long enough. So this is one example, though. Her entry was 85 words. Mine was like 190 something. So I mean, that was double, her entry, and that always makes me nervous because I feel like if someone can get the full entire thought expressed in half the words, like I must be doing something really wrong. But to me, it's a lesson because I've had people, when I do the ad rewrite, sometimes they grow quite a bit. But it's because I feel like we need to have a progression, and one line just isn't going to cut it. So, website headlines, they have to be punchy, they have to jump out, and it's like, but how can you cram? It's kind of the Hemingway story, right? Baby shoes, for sale, never worn. Like, it's 6 words, but there's an entire story in that. So it's not just 6 words to be 6 words. And that's where I think a lot of the disconnect is. So I appreciate your thoughts and your feedback on it. When I had written it, it was like I hit a point where I try to cut as much fluff as possible, and I didn't think there was much other than like cutting out certain people's names or cutting out certain companies that have implemented new hiring policies or something. But I did have a lot of people write back who thought that they were reversed, thought that I was the short one because you're addicted to short writing. You really like short and cutting out fluff. And I'm like, do you read my posts? They're all about 1,300 characters. They're all at the limit. So I don't know where you get that impression, but yeah, I try not to have useless words, but anyway. No, that was a good perspective on it.
In the short copy, long copy argument, so I had, some episodes ago, I had one of the guys from StoryBrand on the podcast, cool. and he talked about what they call the Starbucks test for your website. So they say, it's a bit of a weird scenario, to be honest, but he said, if you are in Starbucks and you just approach someone with your laptop and say, listen, do you mind just looking at this website and telling me what it's about? And supposedly you're going to give the person 5 seconds to look at the website, and they need to be able to tell you what you do. And if they can't tell you in 5 seconds, then you haven't nailed that first line or lines on your website. And I think that's, it's a very clear and important thing to master. And it's going to lead me into talking to you about your thoughts on LinkedIn headlines. But I also think it's true that if you're reading an ad, you don't have necessarily, it's not a slogan. You don't have to catch people's understanding and attention and move them within 6 words. You have 2 or 3 paragraphs to do it in many cases. So as long as the hook gets them in, you've bought yourself enough time to work it a bit more. So, I think it's different message for different medium.
Yeah, I've thought about putting something together on the art of the hook too, because it's that, I mean, I spend the bulk of the time on the hook. I don't underestimate the close. I mean, every part's important, right? So I don't underestimate the close. The close is important because I feel like that kind of gives you continuity into a next action, which I think people often overlook. Download our ebook. That's it. But like, I don't know, it doesn't flow necessarily. But I do put a lot of time on the hook. And one thing that's very interesting to me, and this is potentially a story thing, a lot of people avoid second person. And I was actually just on a job where they said, don't use second person because it could offend people in Europe. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I incorporate second person on almost all of them because, to your point, I need to get someone in the story. So instead of saying I streamline data gathering or something, but it would be like streamline your data with, because I need you to realize, oh, my data is kind of a mess. I need a way to streamline it, right? So I put in a your. But I mean, even that one little change fixes so many ads. I have an ad rewrite that I'm working on right now that's going to be different, and I'm kind of excited about it. A lot of times it's a total teardown and rewrite. I have one, I might even post it today if I can finish it, where I just take theirs and I'm like, let's do 2 simple things that radically change this ad. And it's like, one of them is you use like a proprietary name at the beginning with proprietary name. Let's just push it to the end. So do whatever with, and put that at the end. And then the beginning, they have like, streamline, whatever, optimize revenue, like all these generic things that don't matter. So don't use the generic, use one specific. So instead of optimize your data, like whatever, or I'm trying to think of a good one, but a lot of people say put your data in one place or make your data make sense or something, but something a little bit more specific than these generics that people see. So again, throw a your in there, and now I've pulled you into the story. So I've added, a specific with a your, so I'm trying to relate it to something about you. And then again, at the end, I put something to kind of call to action. So anyway, I'm kind of excited about that one. I'm hoping it'll be good.
The challenge of the specific is a very important one. And this is something, when I tell people about how to tell better stories, this is something people don't necessarily get, but once they get it, it's obvious, is that specific makes it universal. Because it grounds it in reality and makes people feel that you actually know what you're talking about and gives them something very concrete to latch on to. So one example I've given recently is when Steve Jobs was presenting the iCloud, one of the things he talked about was how you have all these different devices, and you have the phone, and you have the computer, and you have the iPad, or whatever you have for your music. And you have cables connected to one and to the other, and then you forget to do one. And most people would have had that very specific experience at some point. He could have used very highfalutin language to talk about the cloud, but he just said, all these cables, and you never know what's updated, and it's a nightmare. It's cables everywhere. The whole thing is a nightmare. Now, we're going to do away with all of that.
Yep.
And I think everyone can see themselves in that situation. And then essentially as you and everyone that talks about messaging or good copy or any marketing knows, it's the problem you're trying to solve. It's not how you solve it. And I think that a lot of people don't get that by having that specific thing, you make it easier for other people to see themselves in it. If you go generic, it just sounds generic, and it might not catch the people that should have been caught, because they didn't see that one thing that they go, oh, actually, that exact thing, I've got a problem with that.
Yeah. And I've done a bit of work with people with features and benefits. So the hard part is when you are too close to a product, you know all the features. So therefore you want to sell the features. So the features of the iCloud, simultaneous update, everything updated, all your pictures in one place, whatever, are the features. And so I found a lot of success by having people actually write down all the features, because that's easy. They can do it. And then you have a so what column. all your pictures in one place. That's a feature. So what? So, and then you talk about never lose a picture again. You don't have to swap things to see where they are. It's you're confident you know where they are. They're safe. They're secure. They're your memories. They're valuable. And now it's like we've created a whole nother thing. The other thing I like really quick, and then we'll get in the headlines, is with story and with some of this messaging, I also think one element that people overlook is the focus. So I can talk about the history of the world. I can talk about the history of the country. I can talk about history of certain people, where I can write about a certain piece of a person's life. I can write a certain day in their life. I can write about how they felt in a moment. So I wrote a poem a while back, which it didn't go over well. Like it didn't, it was early on that I published it. It didn't get a lot of necessarily traction, but that was fine. I just kind of put it somewhere so I had it. I wrote it for my wife a long time ago when we were dating, and it was called The Very First Yawn. So I thought it was funny because when you yawn, if I yawned right now, you would probably yawn. Like, not because you don't like me, not because I don't like you, it's because it just happens. When someone sees someone else yawn, we have that reaction, right? So I thought that would be awesome if it started somewhere. Like if there was a yawn that somebody else saw that started them to yawn, then before you know it, like now we have this pandemic of yawning in the world because anytime anybody yawns, somebody else sees them and yawns, and we're just continuing this thing that was started in one moment. So I wrote a poem about that, but I like it kind of goes in with the copywriting thing too, is you can write about the big generic or you can hyper focus onto like one element. And if you do it well, each one is interesting and each one is kind of different. So you can present the same solution in like 1,000 different ways by narrowing in or broadening out. So,
well, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but if for anyone that studies story or listens to people that talk about story, the exact term you used is the term we use, moment. So the moment is one of the things that many people, including me, will tell you it's absolutely essential for a story is a specific moment. Because because otherwise what you get with is not a story, it's a timeline. It's like how most companies present their, our story is we were founded this day, and blah, blah. Whereas that's not the story. The story, if you are Airbnb, the moment would be when there was a conference in San Francisco. They were broke. They were trying to find some way to make money, realized that all hotels were booked solid. And then they bought some air mattresses, advertised them online for $80 a night, and got 3 guests to stay in air bed and breakfast. So that that was it. That moment is the most important part of the origin story of Airbnb for most customers. If you're talking to investors, then you have all sorts of other interesting things there about how they produced the election serials, the Obama-O's and the Cap McCain's, or how they went to the host's apartments, took a whole bunch of professional pictures and put them on the website because they realized that the quality of the pictures wasn't up to scratch, and that's what was dragging the website down. But whichever scene of those you get, that is the one scene you have to describe in as much detail as you can, because that is really what the story is about. Everything else is what came before and what happened after. And if you don't drill down in a moment, it doesn't feel like real life. And this is why history in school was boring, because although they had every possible interesting thing in the world to talk about, it was always from 30,000 feet, and that's not very exciting.
I love that. See, I struggle with this with big corporate. I was just looking at a company called Vishay. Vishay is an electronics company that does actually pretty boring parts, and then looked them up and found out their founder is actually like a Holocaust survivor, and like there's so many interesting things about the adversity he overcame to found this company. I think of the entire company differently. I mean, and that's a whole point, and I think this gives itself perhaps to story a little more than to regular copywriting, is that products are a dime a dozen, and most products and services are to some extent commodities. So what sets them apart is the human aspect of it. Now,
that human aspect might just be for some reason you bought it and now you have your own experiences attached to that product, but it could just be that you know about the history of the founders, and then there is a human dimension to whatever service you're using. So the Yeti mug, I'm sure, has does it have an interesting story behind it?
I just wanted everyone at home to know that I had one.
All right, a Yeti mug.
I'm just kidding. I'm sure, I got to go look at it. But I think it is like an underdog kind of story, because a lot of the other people in the market, the Colemans and all that stuff, were already established big companies. I'm going to go look up their origin story now, and I bet you they did a good job. And I bet you it's a moment. My point is, it's a commodity. It's a commodity. I mean, it's a total commodity. If you compare this to probably any other mug on the market, they would both keep ice cold the same amount of time. But the story people tell themselves is that this is the absolute best thing in the world. But they've created a story with it. The Yeti, they all have bright colors, and they're about, like grabbing your friends and hitting the beach that day, or climbing a mountain. Like they've created the story around the product so well that you don't buy the product, you're buying the story. Like, it's funny because I wanted to make like a joke, like a true ad for a Yeti, and be like, it's been with me on my wildest adventures from like when I started Netflix until when I stopped watching Netflix. Because most people who buy them, you just buy it to keep your coffee warm in your house. You're not climbing Mount Everest, but you feel like you are. It's really silly just because of this powder-coated mug.
Donald Miller, who's the other guy, the most well-known guy from StoryBrand, he said that there was this knife, like a survival knife or something like that, that he I don't know, I think their ads are always this guy getting into all sorts of trouble and using the knife to, MacGyver his way out of it. And he said, I'm never going to do any of those things in my life, but I just want to be the kind of man who could. So he got, a friend gave him the knife, and he just says, I only use it to cut cheese. But every time I cut cheese, I feel like the most capable man in the world.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Right, okay, headlines. So for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, when if you have social media LinkedIn profile, there is a line or a few lines that go under your profile, and most people use that for their job title. Some people have started using that to say, I help this and this type of person do this other thing. And the reason I wanted to ask you your take on it, which I know you have one, is because headlines are one of the ways where messaging crosses over with copywriting and a story, and one of the hardest parts of any of these activities is for people to very succinctly say, what is this about and why should I care? So, floor is yours.
I think, so number one, your headline is the only thing that travels with you. So your profile picture does, and your headline. So any comment you make, any post you make, anything you make, anytime you do anything, anywhere, your headline is there. The first 55 characters of your headline is there. So you can optimize your about section, you can make a bunch of articles, you can do whatever you want, but nothing goes everywhere like your headline does. That is absolutely everywhere. Any comment, even if you make a smiley face comment, your headline is there. So to me, it's important that you do your headline and you focus on it. There are a lot of people who just list a job title. It depends what you're trying to do. I work with a lot of CEOs that are proud that they're CEOs and they want to say, I'm the CEO of whatever. Okay, like you can. I feel like the CEO title is being watered down because I could just start a company tomorrow and call myself CEO and have zero revenue. And people do. So what I've tried to do, I feel like when you put the I help or something like that, you are, number one, you're making it about yourself. Number two, and I realize I have an I, number two, it's kind of needless characters. So what I like to do is, there was something trending on TikTok like 2 weeks ago, which may as well have been like 2 decades ago as fast as TikTok trends stop. But it was, tell me what you do without telling me what you do. Tell me you have $1 million without telling me you have $1 million. And people would just be sitting on their yacht and take a drink of something ridiculously expensive. And you're like, oh, okay. But I love that concept. So there's 2 pieces I feel like need to be in a headline. The first one is the attention grabbing. That's the 55 characters. That is the tell me what you do without telling me what you do. And I'm breaking some rules because I'm not telling other people what I would do for them. That's implied. I'm telling what I do without telling what I do. And then the second half is an actual, like, okay, actually tell me what you do so that if the analogy is lost on me, if I don't understand the first 55 characters, that I will catch the second half. So mine is, I can explain high tech to my mom. The second half would be tech copywriter for humans. So I feel like the first part says what I do. You know, you have a complex thing. You need to explain it. I could have said, I help you explain complex things to your customers. I could have said that, but that's pretty dry. I'd kind of sound like everybody else. So instead, I chose to break it down the way I did it. I explained what I do in 55 characters or less, right? What I do without explicitly saying it. And that's how I think you get people's attention. It's kind of with that approach. It's hard to, it's not easy. I went through multiple revs. The other thing is you can change your headline 1,000 times, 2,000 times in a day if you want. Like, so it doesn't have to be a big deal. I think some people make a big deal out of changing it. I mean, you can change it 20 times. It doesn't matter. There's no cost associated. Just go and change it.
It's a difficult one, that, because I think a lot of people resist the temptation of being too whimsical with their headline, and you just want to say what you do without necessarily, I help, blah blah blah, which can get kind of boring. But you also don't necessarily want to be too out there. So I think mine at the moment is tell the story and grow your business, right? Which is not overly exciting, but should get the message across. Now, if I
tells what you do, though.
Yeah,
it tells what you do without saying what you do.
Yeah, I could be more whimsical and say become more interested in the Netflix.
I like that, though. Yeah, see, but I would be interested in that. I like it. I was working with somebody.
Maybe Netflix is not, so become more interested in Hulu. Maybe I'll set the bar a bit lower.
Oh, man. No, but I mean that if you become more interesting than Netflix to your customers. I was talking to teachers. There are a lot of teachers who said, my students won't pay attention to me. I'm like, well, honestly, like, we pay attention to whatever the most exciting thing in the room is. You're not the most exciting thing. Like, I can't sugarcoat this. You're not the most exciting thing. Be the most exciting thing, and people will pay attention, however you'd like to do that. So I actually like that. I worked with somebody who was a CEO, and they did an element of phone systems. So they did phone systems for companies. And, of course, the original one is CEO of company name that you've never heard of, right? Which, why am I going to call you? You're the CEO of a company name, and especially nowadays when your company's name is Bean Sprout or something and nobody knows what you do. Like, I don't understand. You're the CEO. Congratulations. So I wanted to change it so people don't think of phone. People pay a lot for lead generation, inbound leads. How do I get new customers? But they're actually calling you, like a lot of them, every day. So I wanted to change that person's to, like, your customers are calling, are you listening? Or something like that, to, like, get you thinking about the customer experience, right? The customer journey, and not specifically your phone system as being an end, just your phone system. So yeah, I like that though. I'd change yours.
Yeah, I might give the become more interested in the Netflix a spin.
Oh man, that is a big. You should put the little VHS logo behind it. The little.
See, I'm not sold. I'm not sold on the emojis yet. I actually just a few days ago, I created a character called Clyde, and it's a conversation. So it's a video of me having a conversation with Clyde, and Clyde, I ask him what he does, and he says, "I'm a purpose filler." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Oh, I help purpose-driven entrepreneurs live a life filled with purpose." And I said, but if they're purpose-driven, don't they have purpose already? And then he starts waffling on. I was like, "Whoa, no, wow!" And then I was just trying to get him to say, "Okay, well, can you actually just say something real that regular human beings will understand?" And then he gets kind of annoyed and says, "Well, this would make a lot more sense if I had a confused emoji and a fire emoji." So
or a couple rockets. Don't forget the rockets.
Yeah, the rockets. Yes. So I'm trying to resist becoming Clyde. Nothing against emojis. It's just not. It's been like an old man's thing with me where I don't love them, and I can definitely see that they can. Sometimes just putting a little microphone saves you having to write that you're a speaker. I don't have any problem with that, but I think I'm just holding on to my old man's habits of just write normally, no emojis.
For me, it's two things. So first, emojis, and then secondly, success of a headline. So the emojis, for me, I feel like if I said, I can explain high tech to your mom or to my mom, I come off rigid. I come off hard. I come off, what's a good word? Like pompous, arrogant, right? Like I can do everything. So I have the little smiley guy with the little sweat bead, like the little awkward. And I think that helps diffuse that. So I think when people read it, it sounds like kind of accidental, right? Like I stumbled upon it, like more so than a hard, like I am the ultimate resource for whatever. So I feel like that helps lighten it, which is why I've included the emoji on it, because the hard part is you're trying to convey emotion in writing, but I have 55 characters, so I can't really, but I don't, like I said, all my best ideas have come to me by accident. The fact that I use the word moment is coincidence. Don't assume any of it is actual intelligence on my part. So that's where that smiley face kind of comes from. It fits. What I would call success of a headline, because I get a lot of questions, and I'm like, the way I view success is not likes, interactions, clappy emojis and all that stuff, is people who reach out and say they would like to work with me. That's how I view success. If I haven't had that in a while, well, that's bad. I get about 3 to 6 reach outs a week, which is good. And that to me is success. Success with the headline is when I have people use it back to me. So I have people reach out, and their intro to me when they will like message me out of the blue is, hey, I need to explain high tech to my mom, help me out. Or one guy, I just finished a write-up for him, was like, my mom has no idea what I'm doing. I need your help. But people repeat back to me what my headline is to me, and that's when I know I won. So if you did your making you more entertaining than Netflix, making you more interesting in Netflix, more interesting Netflix, you know that you would have people reach out and be like, Francisco, I need to be more interesting than Netflix, help me. And to me, that's a sign of a good headline. It worked. I can tell, that's my attribution. I can tell right where you came from because you even used my headline right in that text.
Yeah, and this is something that is this is a summarized version of an effect that I've gotten many times with stories, because I've done a ton of public speaking. And this is something because I'm very dumb as well. So it took me years to realize why my better speeches were better. Even though people would always say, oh, I love that speech about the rat, or I love that one about your ex-wife. It was never this, rhetorical adventure that I put together with all sorts of different things. It was always like a story, and it had plenty of stuff in there to make it more interesting, necessarily than just a normal telling of the story. But people come to you and say, oh, that time you did the one about Tuscany. And then that becomes what they identify with you. And the headline when it works is painting a picture in people's minds, or sending their brain into all sorts of different ways or places that you wouldn't necessarily get if it's not so evocative. And again, I'm troubled clearly because I read yours and I got, I can explain high tech to your mom. I had this, 1980s sort of bully having a conversation. I thought that's a very, sophisticated way to try and tell someone off or threaten them. But it's maybe it's the copywriter way of sounding threatening but competent at the same time. So that's just my troubled mind, clearly.
I know. I'm like, I got to make sure people read it more slowly now so they see my mom, who's a sweet lady, by the way.
I think it's just me, James. Right. Listen, if people want to see any of the stuff that we talked at length about, is LinkedIn pretty much the place to go for it?
Yes. It's actually funny because I was working on a website, but I've had so much business come in, I haven't had time to make the website, which is funny to me because I see all those posts about, do I need a website or do I not? What I would say too is, if you want to see the ad rewrites, you can go, if you go in LinkedIn and you go in the search bar and you just type in hashtag LinkedIn ad rewrites, no spaces, all those posts will pop up, and there's I think I'm pretty close to 400 followers of that tag. I try to keep it refreshed. I'm doing that series on electronics, so if you went into LinkedIn and you typed in hashtag EE101, so EE101, all those would come up. Or you can just hit my profile or send me a message. I try to respond to everybody, even if it's a little delayed. Sorry, Francisco. So I should be fairly accessible. But yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Cool. I'll add all of that stuff to the show notes.
Cool.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we finally did this, and thanks for coming to the show, man.
Yep. Thank you for your persistence.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.